What's a company secret you can share now because you don't work there anymore? Story 1. In the early 2000s, the big animation studios in the USA all colluded to informally stop hiring anyone currently working in the other studios within the agreement. This had a huge impact on wage growth for animation artists who couldn't move within the industry. 10 years later, a class action lawsuit had them all sued and settling for well over $150 million to the workers who experienced this sort of wage theft. Yes, House of Mouse, Shrek, all the big names were doing it. Story 2. Not really a secret, but you know those conventions where you put your card in a jar for a random prize? I was walking by the sales office after, and they were taking them out one by one, discussing who's the most important and deciding who the winner should be. Edit. Fixed a your mistake. I know. Unforgivable. Story 3. I worked for a sleep diagnostic company during both SARS and the swine flu outbreaks of the mid-2000s. Not a lab, but a company who made the hardware and software that was installed in sleep labs and hospitals all across North America. Hospital sleep labs were almost always in the respiratory care wing. We had a team of technicians whose job it was to travel to hospitals and install the equipment. During SARS, Toronto was locked down and air travel in-out was almost completely banned. We had a tech who lived in downtown Toronto. Instead of recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the company had this guy drive to another city, usually Ottawa, and fly out of there to bypass the flying ban. Just before swine flu really hit the news, something swept through our office. People were really sick. Our traveling technicians were all forced out onto planes and into respiratory care wings of hospitals across the continent. Anyone who complained was told to shut up and do their jobs. Swine flu made several rounds through the office, and these guys were always traveling while sick. So yeah, my company helped spread two nasty viruses directly to hospital departments loaded with people who were, by definition, very vulnerable to the effects of said viruses. Story 4. Customers pay a premium. Because the iron used for a company I worked for was made in America. It is made in America after they peel off the Made in India sticker. Story 5. I worked at a casino that had the vault separated from the parking lot by an uninsulated, non-load-bearing empty wall with sheetrock on one side and a stucco surface on the outside. On any given day, the vault contained several million in small bills, but I've seen that room with a mid-8-figure sum after a big weekend. They've changed the layout now, but for a while there, the only protections that room had were cameras and obscurity. Story 6. At Comcast, if you ever were unable to pay bills, we would set payment plans. You would need to do a minimum payment, but it'd keep your service on, and the minimum could be paid later. If you were nice, we could also waive up to $100. You need a rep with knowledge to waive the previous balance versus coming balance, or it could get applied to the next billing cycle. If you fell really far behind, collections external, you could set up a payment plan and get your bills reduced by up to 70. We also see every you rent and how long you've watched it, what room, and how many times you turned it on off. Story 7. The plant has over 10 years without a lost time accident. That's because if someone gets hurt bad enough to miss work, they're suddenly e-training, either at a desk in the office or, more often, working from home. Plant line workers working from home. Yeah, right. I've seen dudes drugged out of their gourds, with bandages and drainage tubes asleep at a PC doing e-training. The company wins safety awards from the state every year. Story 8. Every single one of you has eaten food that was well out of its proper temperature range for an extended period of time at some point in the supply chain. Story 9. If you dump grandma's ashes in a ride at an amusement park, grandma is going to end up in a vacuum cleaner bag in the trash. If you dump her ashes outside, they will be swept up and trashed or hosed down into the sanitary sewer drain. Grandma is definitely not spending eternity in the haunted mansion. Story 10. I worked at Boston Market back in the 90s when I was in high school. They're long gone now, and I'm sure things changed after I left when I went off to college. Not so much a secret as it's something people would probably find surprising. Everything there except for the pies and cakes was made fresh, either made in back of house or at the commissary kitchen at one of the nearby locations. All of the proteins came in raw and were cooked on site. Chickens came from the commissary already loaded onto the spits for the rotisserie, but all of them were cooked in the ovens you saw behind the counter. The sides were prepped fresh in the back kitchen as well. Edit realized the soup was also not technically fresh as the bases came from concentrate, but the chicken that was added came directly from those we cooked on site. Story 11. When staying in a Vegas resort in the summer, your room's AC isn't broken. It's cheaper to comp the people who complain than it is to run the chillers to where the system will get the rooms below 75. Story 12. The milkshakes you get at Steak and Shake are not made from ice cream. They get a special container called Shake Base that tastes terrible but basically thickens up the milk that they blend in. They have ice cream for Sundays, they just don't use it in the shakes because it's too expensive. If you watch the commercials, they promote hand-dipped milkshakes, but they never say what they are hand-dipping. Story 13. I worked for a poker site. We had staff members who were experienced poker players playing cash games to win money from our players. Yes, they could also see what the other players had and what cards were coming on flop, turn, and river. I worked in security, so knew all about this, but was basically told to get sacked and get a heavy beating if it ever got out. Story 14. Throwaway account. I started working at Enterprise Rental Cars at the end of 2019. When the pandemic hit April of 2020, they laid a bunch of us off, then brought us back in July. Part of it was special training on how to effectively disinfect the cars between renters. They were advertising heavily that every car was sterilized between each customer. I cleaned exactly one car with the new procedure before the desk complained that I was taking too long to clean the car. I wasn't hitting their 3 cars per hour metric. All of the service agents dropped the cleaning procedures and went back to just a quick vacuum. They stopped complaining because we were hitting their vaunted 3 cars per hour cleaned metric. Also, the official policy when the oil change warning came up on the dash was reset the mileage so the light would be off for the customer. Those poor cars never had the oil changed unless they were otherwise in the shop for repair. Story 15. Those employees at Claire's that pierce your ears? They can literally just be 15, 16-yo kids with no work experience, literally, on their first day at their very first job, told to go out and start piercing ears. Just pretend you've done this before. I was one of those kids. Story 16. You may think defense contracting only goes. World conflict happens. Government decides to intervene. Government reaches out to defense contractor for weapons to achieve. Peace contractor develops weapons for government based on conflict. What happens? A-lot defense contractor uses internal funding to develop weapons. Defense contractor scours the globe looking for potential conflicts to use. Weapons. On-defense contractor uses contacts in government for sales presentation of weapons capabilities and to urge escalation of conflicts under the guise of furthering innovation. Government uses political influence to escalate conflict. Defense contractor shareholders make millions of dollars. Rinse and repeat. I've sat in these presentations and they are void of morality. Story 17. I did development for a large sunglass company. The high-end luxury brands you pay in the hundreds of dollars for usually come from the same factories in China as the low-end goods sold at Target. The lenses are not necessarily better quality in many cases either. When you plunk down a lot of money for Armani, RL, Prada, and Versace, you are not necessarily getting top-of-the-line quality frames and lenses like you think. Story 18. Never worked there, but a friend of mine did forever as a general manager and got let go. So he tells everyone he can. The secret to Mellow Mushroom's pizza crust is molasses. Story 19. The heavily environmental regulated industry capable of producing massive greenhouse gas emissions that gets inspected regularly for EPA compliance. We always knew at least 24 hours in advance when an inspection was coming and covered things up to be compliant. As soon as the inspectors left, the plant was wide open and absolutely dumping gases. Story 20. Worked at a water park for my first job. I dropped a hamburger bun on the disgusting floor during a rush, and my lead, without even turning around, told me put that bun on the burger and give it to the customer. I don't even know how she knew I dropped the bun. The food director gave me a Vicodin on the job because I jammed my finger. Employees like crazy in the food stands. Story 21. The cleaning products that a large corporation sells to restaurants and other food industries are mostly commodity chemicals, e.g., diluted nitric or sulfuric acid, etc., with color added for marketing. Some products are actually worse than just hot water, but you can't sell that, so. Story 22. I used to work at a rock radio station. If they were giving away a nice prize to the 10th caller and wanted that winner on the air, we would pick the first caller that was super excited even if it was before or after the 10th caller. If it was a smaller prize where we didn't want to put the winner on the air, we would pick the actual 10th caller. Story 23. Investors thought that the software was very clever and the business model was excellent and automated. There were a team of 10 people employed to do all of that work manually on a computer. Story 24. Private equity groups own a large chunk of vet clinics. But when they buy out your local vet clinic, they keep the same name so you don't think it's corporate. They then jack up prices based on the average area income while bullying distribution for lower prices, thus increasing their margins, sometimes up to 400. If you don't mind driving, try to find more rural clinics in lower income areas for better vet prices. If they do livestock, it's less likely they are corporate, although this is starting to change. Story 25. Snap-on sandblasting cabinets are the same as the ones at Harbor Freight. Same factory, same assembly line, just one gets a sticker and a longer warranty. Story 26. If you have Kohl's Cash and it's going to expire before you use it, buy something random with it, then return it. You'll get the Kohl's Cash refunded and it'll last for 30 days. They used to accept expired vouchers 7 days after, but that's going away this summer. Story 27. The state-of-the-art app that everyone was clamoring over was made by a single intern that they underpaid and got rid of once it was done. Edit spelling mistake. Story 28. Noxzema skin cream gets its crunchy feel by refrigerating the jars just after they're labeled. The essential oils in the cream set up a crystalline structure when refrigerated. Story 29. Pawn Shop 1. Always clean the item before bringing it in and be ready to show it works. 2. Be kind to the broker you're working with. This can go a long way in how they negotiate with you. 3. Have the broker quote a price before you do. They will always ask what you're looking for first to see if it's less than what they'd max offer. Negotiate after the broker quotes a price. 4. They have no interest in your situation or financial struggles. Literally 80 of the people in there have the same issues, so stick to general talk. 5. Our shop would typically pay 25 or 30 of new price found online or at retailers. Yes, internet is available for them to reference. They also have set prices to pay for common items, video game systems, TVs, accessories, etc. If you're not comfortable only receiving around 25 of new for your item even in good condition, don't bother coming in to sell and go to FB Marketplace instead. 6. Inventory is the pawn shop's biggest failure point. It doesn't make the shop any money with items sitting on the shelf. The broker doesn't have any skin in the game for items on the floor for sale, so use that to your advantage. Make an offer less than the sticker price. Likely they will consider it and either accept or counter. Again, too much inventory kills pawn shops and they get a lot of it every day. 7. Lastly, the biggest secret. Always tell the broker you want to pawn your item instead of sell. Pawn shops would much rather give you a loan and you pay a large amount of interest and then have you pick up the item at the end. It removes the inventory aspect and doesn't waste labor or time trying to sell the item later on if it ever does sell. Not picking up the item you pawn doesn't hurt your credit score, and nobody really keeps track of whether or not you pick up your items. Conversely, you're much more likely to get a few extra dollars for something you pawn due to the broker thinking you may come to pick it up, and the more they loan out to you, the more interest they will get. You'll get much more room to haggle on items you sell if you tell them that you wish to pawn your item and just never pick up. You're welcome. Story 30. Safety first only applies when it hurts their profit margins. I worked at an industrial site where they repeated this constantly. There was a large tool cabinet that was on unsteady ground that everyone was complaining about, as it would teeter every time someone opened or closed it. Company wouldn't do anything about it. One day it fell on someone and killed them. Suddenly the company was all, "This was a preventable accident and we should all do better," naturally shifting the blame everywhere but themselves. The death was never reported on in the news and we were encouraged not to talk about it out of respect for the family. Not gonna say what company it was because I don't want to get sued. Let's just say they're pretty gassy and you find them a lot on the beach. Story 31. Probably a well-known secret, but in retail, they raise the prices a week before Black Friday so they can put it back on sale for 90 off and not lose a lot of money. Story 32. Phase Technologies. They produce 3-phase machines and motor starters. If you work in the plumbing, oil, heavy equipment like lathes, AC, etc., or most certainly in the farming industries, you may have heard them. They primarily focus their sales in the farming industries to work on pivots and pumps. But did you know, anytime they release a new product, they have most certainly not tested it enough in real-world conditions. Basically, knowing that the product that can cost thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars will malfunction, break, or catastrophically fail in less than a week from delivery. Furthermore, you want to buy a warranty at a premium price of $600 USD or more? Guess what? You won't get any repair parts sent out to you, plus we don't have any service members that can come out to you to fix your 100,000 piece of equipment you just broke. Nope, you have to pay to send it to us, that is, on your dime. And if we deem the issue to have been caused by you through whatever arbitrary nonsense we just make up, guess what? Your warranty is invalid, and you now have to pay to get it shipped back to you. Oh wait, there is more. Did you buy one of the motor drivers for your garage door or something? Well, you see, they advertise that the 3 amp or 5 amp model can drive your door, but really, you'll need a 30 amp driver, even though your machine is rated for far less. So don't trust what they have on their site, whether it be warranty, details, or even price. Seriously, this was the scummiest company I've ever had the pleasure to work for, and I'm glad I no longer work for them. Story 33. I worked as a private security for people who make millions per year. Among them were church pastors, preachers, and other so-called religious men. And these religious men like the drugs and the youngest girls. Despite having so much to lose, they are stingy when it comes time to pay. There are movie stars, music makers, and other super rich people who live in regular houses, drive shitty cars, and live in your communities as the person next door. The creepy house on your block that has the weirdo stranger watching you from behind, drawn blinds, and only goes out at night. It is because whoever lived there does not want to be recognized. 90 of my guard duty for these people was to dress like a bum and deal with services providers like phone men, internet and cable, landscapers, make sure the house was stocked with food and drink, and to accept packages. One of our clients had an 800-square-foot hidey hole that looked like a rundown trailer house on the outside where she would watch movies, eat pizza, and talk with the assigned guard all night long. We had another trio of musicians who had a 3-bedroom townhouse, and they would crash there to write songs, and the guard was the one ordering the food, running fetch errands. Story 34. When I worked at Electronics Boutique, we never tested anything that was traded in. We would have a visual check of the conditions of discs, give consoles a good clean, then just resell everything and let the customers test it for us. If it came back faulty, they just got an immediate refund or exchange, and that was the point they were tested at. I think the time saved was more worthwhile to the company than the odd bit of lost money on a trade. We traded so much there would have been one member of staff full-time testing stuff, far cheaper to just bin the odd mistake. Story 35. Company paid employees, family members, and gift cards for an exchange for a 5-star review on Amazon, was told this was standard. Reviews. Take them with a grain of salt. Story 36. I used to work for a medical software company. One of the divisions, not mine, was using live patient data as their test data. They did nothing to anonymize it. They also did not have any of their test systems encrypted. Their office was broken into, and most of the computers stolen along with all the unencrypted patient data. The company didn't want to deal with the HIPAA violation fines, so they lied about what was stolen on the police report and lied about the data they were using. Story 37. The majority of the chips we made that were put in hair dryers to blow when they accidentally fall in your tub, preventing electrical shock, never passed through testing. The bean counters decided it was more expensive to recall the chips then to actually have to pay out for an accidental death. Story 38. About to be laid off, so the secret ingredient to my works, mac and cheese, yellow food coloring. The kids won't touch it if it isn't orange. We use egg shade food dye, and it makes it that craft orange and they love it. Tried it without. Same recipe and ingredients, and they complained. Wanted the old recipe back. Story 39. Monitored home burglar alarm systems don't prevent burglaries. A beware of dog sign on the fence and a large dog water bowl on the porch make a much better deterrent. I worked many levels in the industry for 10 years. Story 40. You ever go into a cell phone store and the person working with you asked you to unlock the phone W and then say they need to take it to the back to diagnose something or get a coworker's opinion? They were very likely looking for nudes. I saw up to district management levels participate in this and was told by my manager that it wasn't worth pursuing. Also, we would get asked to try to access spouse and children's phones all the time. Story 41. Those custom closet companies have a ton of flexibility and price. The one I worked for could go down 40, although you could call a manager and ask for more. Story 42. You know how every time you search for anything on WebMD, you end up thinking you have some horrendous, incurable chronic ailment? That's not an accident. They are not a health information site, but another shill for big pharma. Almost all of their revenue comes from pharma advertising, sponsorship, and data mining. Story 43. Chewy has great customer service because they know that's what makes money. They do not give a about the human experience. I worked in an office without a bathroom. I was also forced to arrive to work early and stay late to power up down my computer off the clock. Which, yes, is illegal, and yes, they were sued over it. I could go on. The fact that they preach the customer service practices that they do almost makes it worse, because it's obvious that they know how to treat people with dignity and respect. They just don't believe their employees deserve it. Story 44. You know that exceptional, world-renowned hospital with the lowest mortality rate across all surgical procedures? They manipulate their operating room mortality percentage by wheeling any crashing patients into the ICU, which coincidentally starts in the hallway outside the OR. This has become commonplace in surgical departments. Deaths in OR are extremely detrimental to surgeons, departments, and hospitals, and the stats are manipulated as a patient is dying by wheeling them into an adjoining room that's not surgery. Story 45. When I worked at Goodwill, we had a morning meeting daily. That meeting was basically all about sales. Nonprofit I think it's cool the way they give jobs to disabled people, but after that also anything valuable you donated didn't see the sales floor. It went to online sales. Story 46. We don't collect or store your voice recording captured from our smart devices for longer than necessary to process your request. Yes, they do. How do you think they are training those LLMs? Story 47. I worked in casinos. Everyone knows that the slots are tricked for you to lose your money, but you can't imagine how heavily it is tricked for you to lose. We had a showroom in the office with slots, and we only needed to press one button to put more money in it, we were never able to win any good amount. We even tricked the machine and played for whole 2 days in a row without any substantial gains. I was working for the biggest and best slot machines company in the world. That's why they are the best. You can't win anything with slots. Story 48. A major law firm I worked for suffered a cyber attack. They never publicly disclosed it. I think they secretly told some clients, but it wasn't news. I don't know the full extent of the damage or data lost, but it caused them to change a lot of things, so I assume it was a big deal. Story 49. Maybe I was only one that did it, but back when I worked at Blockbuster, when asking me if we had the most popular movie of the weekend in stock, I would walk over, check the Dropbox, and tell you nope, while staring at 3 copies laying there ready to be checked back in. Treat people in customer service with respect, and it'll take you a lot farther. Story 50. I used to work for a medical school. We graduated students who never should have graduated because having a higher percentage of students graduating is an important statistic for attracting more applicants and making more money. The school would make these students agree to never become medical doctors and only do research work. This isn't super easy to enforce, and there are likely doctors practicing medicine that agreed not to and should have never been allowed to become doctors. Story 51 company that calls itself an employee benefits consulting firm, but is really just set up to grift public tax dollars in school systems through the marketing of unnecessary or barely needed services out of state employees, who often already have those benefits without a need for an additional one. Atlanta, Georgia HQD, but owner sold October 2022 the firm to a national enterprise that is far more legit in their services and operations, based out of Chicago, IL. I can name names. Story 52. Worked for Whirlpool Refrigerator Factory. You're paying hundreds of dollars more for deluxe models that have essentially the same compressors, hardware, wiring, etc. One I remember the most was a Kenmore Elite versus a cheaper KitchenAid model. Literally the only difference was the glass shelves had lines and the other didn't. About a $600 difference in price. Story 53. I worked at Toys R Us, and I managed the doll section. I can only speak for the store I worked at. Non-white dolls had very little sales. By Fayar, blonde-haired, blue-eyed dolls sold the best. I imagine for doll companies, it's hard to balance creating the products the customers want versus creating the product they actually buy. Story 54. The meat in Wendy's chili is actually the flesh of the newest employee for that location. We sacrifice one a week, depending on demand and how much space is in the walk-in. Story 55. A certain CEO of a donut company was having an affair with a coworker. Before he divorced his wife, he made her a partial franchise owner. After the divorce, this company bought this one franchise back for 3 times what it was worth as to pay her off with shareholder money. He was soon fired after being called the worst CEO of the year late 2004. Golden parachute was applied. Was told this by a close friend. Story 56. All of the food banks in the United States have been purchasing poor quality canned and other types of processed shelf-stable foods from China and Canada to make their money stretch further. With the new tariffs, that is no longer able to be done. This means that the local food shelves have less access to free and expensive, non-perishable food items to distribute to those in need. There are going to be a lot more hungry Americans, with a large percentage of those Americans being children and the elderly in the near future. Story 57. Being a janitor was like double weird. Walking in places the general public can't, baseball locker rooms. Also hearing things in bathrooms behind the scenes. Rumors happen even in general management. Story 58. This will get lost. But I worked for a gaming wholesaler during the Magic the Gathering days. They were making a mint already, but the owner went even further. He took a chunk of the boxes they received, and these were already pre-ordered by the stores he sold to, claimed they'd been shorted, and then resold them at retail under a different name to the stores. Say you ordered 100 boxes of cards. You'd get told, oops, we got less than we hoped. Here's 80 boxes. If there was an actual shortage, he'd still pull it so you'd get 60. You're paying wholesale, say $40 per box. You complain to your rep, who then says, well, I know a store that has them for sale, only that store is a chick in the next office with a different phone line, pretending to be a different company. There, you get charged a massive markup. So retail the box would be 100, with a wholesale distributor, you were supposed to pay 40. Dude shorted your order, then sold you the boxes he withheld at a massive markup, to the point where you were paying 400 a box, and thanking the faux company for helping. Former HVAC customer service rep don't let a tech around your unit alone. Some of them cut the wires just to sell you a new unit. This is especially true if you're old. Story 59. Every major software product is released with known bugs, often hundreds of known bugs. It is impossible to ever fix them all, because fixes tend to introduce new bugs. Story 60. The goal of every Best Buy employee, as with most retail now, is to get you to sign up for a credit card or paid membership. If you already have them, then you're essentially a waste of their time. Every product they show you is because it has a promotion that goes with one of the two signups they need, interest-free financing and member deals being the main hooks. There are more things to push depending on the department too. For example, if a laptop is being sold, the employee is expected to get them to sign up for Microsoft 365 on top of a credit card and paid membership. If you already know what you want, the best way to shop there is to order it online for in-store pickup. There is basically no opportunity to sell you on anything else since the sales transaction is already over. Story 61. When a dealership knocks off a few bucks of the sticker price, they tack $1,000s of dollars on the back end. I don't know how they do it, but when I sold cars, the manager would get so offended when people would offer $500 less than the sticker price. I'd always hear him mumble, "Let's see how that cocksucker likes paying an extra $3 grand on the back end." That dude was the reason my car selling career was so short. Story 62. When you go to retail store and they super pushy about you open their credit card, they make almost as much in interest than the actual margin on product you buy. Story 63. The big boss knew that the 26-year-old manager who was married with 2 kids was hooking up with 17-year-old employees. But because AOC in the state is 17, there wasn't much he could do about it. It is why certain rather pretty girls worked the favorable after-school weekday shifts when business is slow, and the less conventionally attractive girls and all the boys worked primarily in the mega rush hour. Story 64. Nobody ever dies on company property. They give you CPR until ambulance arrives and pronounced you deceased later at the hospital to avoid having to pay out any accidental death benefits from a multi-billion-dollar company. Story 65. Pfizer does not reimburse remote employees for printers, ink, or paper even if you're printing Pfizer documents, doing Pfizer work during Pfizer hours. Yes, really. Despite generating billions in annual revenue, they've decided your 12 ream of paper is where fiscal responsibility begins. Story 66. Worked in the office of a cleaning company. Tiny company, so I had a hand in most things. Pretty questionable, lacks immigration status validations. And wage theft. Probably felt more comfortable doing it since both sides knew a lot of the workers weren't there legally. And the ones that were legal either didn't know what the time clock system was doing was illegal, or didn't have money for lawyers anyway. Owner of the company fired 2 HR payroll VPs who tried to get compliant on this stuff. They started hinting that they'd like me to start helping out with some HR and payroll stuff, and that's when I polished up the resume. I would have been an idiot to sign my name to those forms. This was a long time ago, probably 10 years. No clue if any of this got fixed. Story 67. Disney buys ground beef on the open market. So does Taco Bell. Taco Bell has enough buying power to put a lock on much of it. The shelf life is 16 days, but Taco Bell won't take anything after 10 days. Disney buys up the older than 10 years, but less than 16-day-old ground beef and serves it in their parks. That taco that you ate at Tortuga Tavern near Pirates of the Caribbean? Yeah, the ground beef in it wasn't fit for Taco Bell standards. Also, the turkey legs are manufactured by layering turkey meat onto a bone. Story 68. A company was building a product for their client, who is a big company. This client was already using a similar product from another vendor. The client gave the new company access to that older product. Using that access, the new company copied it and built the same product. As a result, the original vendor is now out of the picture for that client. Story 69. Early to mid-2000s, I worked at a small East Coast fried chicken chain called Cluck U, at least in the location we were. The chicken was battered, breaded, and fried by us, not really me. The chef did it, and I mostly just cut up the meat and was the delivery driver. And all the sides were made from scratch. The only thing that came in pre-made was the hot sauces and the biscuits, which were basically just Aldous tube biscuits thrown in the deep fryer. And the hottest of the hot sauces was basically mace. Story 70. I used to work at a restaurant. One of the secret menu hacks people loved ordering this huge, messy off-menu burger was actually just made up by the employees as a joke one day. It wasn't even real at first, but people started asking for it thanks to TikTok, so we made it real and started charging extra. Corporate never officially added it to the menu, but we made so much money off it. Story 71 used to work for Rolex. We did have very low stock. Only like 50 watches a month. If someone wanted something, you had to present the case to the manager with a massive story why they deserved the item. But mostly they went to the boss's friends or people willing to give you gifts under the table. All of the super rare watches were sold to friends of the business who would often buy the owner elaborate gifts. You'd be encouraged to get people to buy ladies' watches or undesirable pieces to show they were serious enough to buy a sub or whatever. Story 72. Celeb PR and politician PR pay people to post on social media, including Reddit. They also use bots. It's an entire industry. They pay mods and admins to push certain narratives and remove certain others. PR firms and law firms work together on stuff like this. With enough money and pull, They can create or change entire public opinions. Story 73. Video rental store night managers actually care about you. Late fees can be wiped off completely if you're not a I can't say this was franchise-wide, but my boss made it very clear. I had multiple customers who just needed someone to just be cool. It might not be much, but they appreciated it. Story 74. Worked at 2 Tex-Mex restaurants. The family-owned restaurant was super popular. They had like 6 locations in town. The way the food was made was horrible. Almost everything was microwaved, and most of the food served was leftovers. Rice? Straight from the fridge. Beans? Same. Ground beef for tacos? Same. The only way you could guarantee fresh food is if it was anything that had to be grilled, like fajitas or quesadillas. The fillings were beef or chicken fajitas, maybe the fries from the kids' menu, but that's about it. It was just sad to see the cook make some fresh rice, but instead of serving it, he would stick into the cooler. Have to use the old stuff first. Order of chicken enchiladas? Use the shredded chicken that's been sitting on the fridge for the last few days. Add tomato sauce and spices, roll it into the enchiladas, cover it with more tomato soup, add cheese, then toss it into the microwave to melt the cheese and heat up the chicken. Customer didn't finish their chips? Back into the warmer. Same for the hot sauce. They cut corners everywhere and only wash the kitchen floors once a week. They're all closed now, but were very popular for a while. On the other hand, I worked at another Tex-Mex restaurant, part of a chain, not Taco Bell. Everything was made fresh every day. The head chef arrived at 7 to have everything ready by 11. And even that time wasn't enough, as we would always rush towards the opening times. At night, they would throw away everything that wasn't used. The only thing we kept was ground beef. But we didn't use leftovers for tacos. We used it for filling in enchiladas. Both are now out of business, but the one who tried serving fresh food went out of business way before the other one did.